We've actually just had the press conference from Lieutenant Major Fruin after this so-called wargaming meeting. He said there is now a draft plan to reset the vaccine rollout. Is that a good idea?
Well, having a plan is a good idea. I think it's extraordinary that 18 months into this pandemic and 5 months into the vaccine rollout strategy, it was only last week that Scott Morrison realised, or at least admitted, that we have to have a plan. But still, all we have out in the public realm is a framework with no timelines, no details, no targets, no numbers, no milestones. Really a plan to have a plan. And given that we're now running last in the OECD in terms of vaccine rollout, we don't have safe quarantine in place, we have these lockdowns happening quite regularly now, it's frankly too late. The Prime Minister needs to get a move on and get this back on the rails.
Well, that's happening. We'll see what comes out of it because not much detail. But you mentioned or alluded to the 4-point plan. We don't have timeframes yet, but that's because we need to, crunch the numbers, get the vaccination rate. What do you make of this plan otherwise, phases 1 to 4?
Well, they're pretty self-evident. I think anyone with even a casual view about how you deal with a pandemic would have put a four-point or 4-phase framework in place. The magic lies in the numbers, in the time frame, in the targets. And I don't understand, given that we've got so much modelling out there by different universities, different think tanks, other epidemiologists, why is it taking this long for the Commonwealth to get some detail into this plan when we are running way behind? I heard the New South Wales Premier express her hope that this is the last Sydney lockdown until people are vaccinated, and we all share her hope. But the federal government's budget papers assumes that there will be a week-long lockdown every month for the rest of the year because we are running so far behind on vaccination and have such a leaky quarantine system.
Well, but yeah, let's perhaps not go by budget estimates. They can assume the best or the worst. But when you say, there's all this modelling out there, isn't that the point? There is so much different modelling from different people. And we need to actually assess not what number we get to herd immunity or whatever it might be, but the risk appetite. So that risk appetite is a political decision. It's made by our leaders. What do you think it should be?
Well, I want to see the modelling beforehand. I mean, you do that in an informed way. The government has said, or the Prime Minister has said, that they've got the Doherty Institute, a highly respected institute, working on this. And I think we all want to see what those numbers show. Then obviously they need to be tested and dissected, and some decisions need to be taken. The point I was making earlier, given the welter of information we have here in Australia and around the world, is to question, why has this taken so long? Why is the Prime Minister late to every important decision about how the nation grasps this pandemic? I mean, if he decided to build purpose-built quarantine last year, he decided to accept the advice that was given to him about that, we'd have them in operation now, wouldn't see these almost weekly leaks from hotel quarantine that are causing enormous disruption to our country.
But focusing on the path out, again, we need to know what they're modelling, what they're trying to achieve. Let me ask it this way. Should they be trying to achieve something similar to how we treat flu, which obviously accepts in a normal year there can be hundreds, perhaps even over 1,000 deaths?
Well, I'm a bit reluctant simply to assume that COVID ends up like flu. I mean, as we've seen around the world, there are still substantial hospitalisations, lots of new infections happening in countries that have high vaccination rates. So I'm reluctant to sort of make the casual jump to the idea that this is simply going to be the flu. But what we do want to do is have this as a virus that is not causing widespread serious disease resulting in hospitalisations and death. I mean, that obviously is the core of the modelling, and as the Prime Minister conceded, that means that there may be different numbers in terms of vaccination for different cohorts of the population. We know this is a virus that disproportionately impacts older people and people with compromises to their immune system. So all of that needs to be worked through. What I'm concerned about is we're starting to see backbench politicians from the government sort of engage in some sort of auction about what they think the numbers should be. That is a terrible way to go. We should be really letting
we have had the federal government, in fairness to them there, say, let's get the number back, so they didn't want to set one on it right now. But you alluded to you don't want to necessarily say this will be like the flu. Everything we know about it so far is it's more transmissible and more likely to kill you than the flu. So why wouldn't it be treated? If we can get it to the same death rate as the flu when the flu normally kills more people, isn't that a reasonable thing to aim for?
Well, let's wait for the Doherty Institute and other experts to come back and say that, to tell us what they think will happen if we get to certain vaccination rates in terms of the prevalence of this disease, and particularly what the impact is on people by way of hospitalisation or even death. So I'm loath to see a whole bunch of politicians jump into these sort of vague comparisons between two different diseases. Obviously, the objective is to get this disease under such a control that it means we don't have widespread hospitalisations and death.
Do you agree?
To that extent, it is like the flu, but these sort of casual comparisons aren't very helpful, I think, to making some very important decisions about the future.
Okay, let me ask you about the attitude of the states, though, as well. Do they need to be realistic about what can be achieved? I mean, you're in isolation right now in South Australia for the crime of being in the ACT, which hasn't had a local transmission case for a year. Do states need to start accepting a little bit more risk?
Well, I think what we saw last week was an agreement by all of the state premiers and chief ministers, as well as the Prime Minister, to come up with a plan that is agreed by everyone. I think that's a very important step. Obviously, it's an easier step to make when there's no detail on the table to arm wrestle about, and the devil will be in the detail, I think, when it gets to that level. But obviously, all of us want to see a level of agreement between state, territory and the Commonwealth Government about a way forward. And that will require states to take particular positions around this plan. But it also requires the Prime Minister to do his two jobs, which is to speed up the vaccination rate, because otherwise all of this is academic. If we continue to sit last in the OECD, it's all academic. And also to put in place some purpose-built quarantine, because all of the experts concede that while this virus is continuing to spread around the world, while it's continuing to mutate and breed variants, we are going to need safe quarantine as well. And those are the two jobs the Prime Minister's really failed at.